Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I want you to imagine something very simple. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you own, your home, your fields, your school, your workplace, has disappeared underwater. Not for a day, not for a week, but for months. Imagine looking at your children and not knowing if you can provide them clean water, food, or even shelter. This is not a story from a book. This is not history. It happened, and happened to millions of people in Pakistan. Now, when disasters like these strike, the world always looks at leaders, waiting to hear what they will say. Words have power. They can heal, they can inspire, but they can also hurt and divide. One statement, one sentence from a global leader can change how millions of people are perceived and how billions of dollars of aid are either given or withheld. That is why when Donald Trump made his shocking statement about Pakistan's floods, the world paid attention. And whether we agree with his words or not, they revealed something very important. They showed us how fragile global compassion can be, and how much responsibility leaders carry when they speak. But this story is not just about politics. It is about resilience. It is about how a nation, often misunderstood by the world, stood strong when nature tested it beyond limits. It is about how crises, as painful as they are, can also become opportunities to reshape a nation's image, demand fairness, and call for justice. And most importantly, it is about what role Europe and the rest of the world must play when humanity is at stake. I promise you, if you stay with me till the very end, you will not just hear about floods and politics. You will hear about courage, about responsibility, and about the kind of unity this world desperately needs today. Because this is not just Pakistan's story. It is a test of our shared humanity, a lesson for every nation, and a call to every individual who believes that together we can build a better tomorrow. The devastating impact of Pakistan floods on millions of lives. The floods that struck Pakistan were not just another seasonal disaster. They represented one of the most devastating humanitarian crises in recent history. Entire towns and villages were submerged, millions of people were displaced, and countless families lost their homes, livelihoods, and loved ones. The sheer scale of destruction shocked the world as the rising water swatted away crops, bridges, schools, and hospitals, leaving a trail of destruction that would take years, if not decades, to repair. For Pakistan, a country already grappling with economic challenges, political turbulence, and climate vulnerability, the floods were more than a natural disaster. They were a reminder of how fragile human societies can be when nature strikes with such fury. The impact was not confined to one sector or region. Agriculture, which supports a large portion of Pakistan's economy, suffered unimaginable losses as fertile lands were drowned, their crops were destroyed, and livestock perished. This not only created immediate food insecurity for millions of people, but also posed long-term threats to the country's food supply chain. Infrastructure crumbled under the force of the floods, with roads cut off, communication lines disrupted, and health systems overwhelmed. International observers noted that the scale of destruction was equivalent to entire provinces being pushed decades back in terms of development and growth. Beyond the material damage, the human cost was immeasurable. Children faced hunger, disease, and the trauma of displacement. Families were forced to take shelter in makeshift camps with little access to clean water or medical facilities. With stagnant water everywhere, the risk of epidemics such as cholera and malaria loomed large. For the affected communities, it was not just about surviving the floods, but about rebuilding lives from scratch. At the global level, the floods highlighted the severe consequence of climate change. Pakistan, despite contributing less than 1% to global carbon emissions, found itself paying one of the heaviest prices for the actions of industrial powers. This tragedy exposed the unfair balance of responsibility in the climate crisis, where vulnerable nations often suffer the most despite contributing the least. For the international community, the disaster was a wake-up call, a reminder that climate change knows no borders, and its victims are not just statistics, but human beings struggling to live with dignity. When Donald Trump made his shocking statement about the floods in Pakistan, it immediately sparked global attention because of both its tone and timing. The world was already aware of the human suffering unfolding, and leaders across continents were issuing condolences, pledging support, and calling for unity. Yet Trump's words stood out, not because they aligned with the usual diplomatic sympathy, but because they carried an element of shock, reflecting his characteristic bluntness and unfiltered political style. For Pakistanis already reeling from the destruction, the statement felt more than just commentary. It became a reflection of how powerful leaders perceived their struggles. The shocking nature of his statement lies in its divergence from traditional diplomacy. Most world leaders choose carefully measured words when responding to humanitarian crises, often balancing compassion with political caution. Trump, however, is known for his direct approach, which can sometimes come across as insensitive or controversial. In this case, his remarks left many asking whether they were intended as criticism, indifference, or a candid reality check. Such ambiguity is what gave his words a global ripple effect, instead of just being another message in the stream of international reactions. It forced policymakers, analysts, and the public to debate the underlying meaning and implications. For Pakistan, this was both a challenge and opportunity. On one hand, Trump's words could be seen as dismissive of the scale of the crisis, undermining the need for urgent global solidarity. On the other hand, they placed Pakistan firmly in the spotlight, reminding the world that when a crisis of such magnitude occurs, it cannot be ignored. In politics, even a controversial statement can serve to amplify an issue, forcing media cycles and public conversations to focus on it longer than usual. Trump's choice of words, whether intentional or not, ensured that the plight of millions of Pakistanis was not buried under the endless scroll of global news. At a deeper level, the statement also underscored the gap between expectations and reality in international relations. Developing countries often hope that powerful nations will offer unconditional support during humanitarian disasters. However, Trump's remarks revealed the harsh truth that politics, self-interest, and perception played just as a larger role as compassion. For Europe and other regions watching closely, the statement became a reminder of how narratives are shaped not only by tragedy, but also by the words of influential leaders who set the tone for global response. When a leader as globally recognized as Donald Trump makes a statement, whether supportive, dismissive, or critical, it inevitably shapes the way the world interprets events. His comments on Pakistan's floods had the power to influence global perception in ways that go far beyond the immediate crisis. In international relations, narratives are just as important as facts. The devastation caused by the floods was undeniable, yet the way influential figures framed such events can either rally international sympathy and action or create skepticism and indifference. Trump's choice of words and tone mattered because they carried weight not just in American politics, but across the world, particularly in countries that look to the United States for cues on foreign engagement. Global perception of Pakistan has often been shaped by political narratives, sometimes focusing on instability, security concerns, or economic struggles, rather than resilience, progress, and human potential. In the context of the floods, Trump's remarks became more than a reaction. They became a lens through which much of the world viewed Pakistan. B.T. Blowman quoted the second and followed. For some, his statement might have confirmed stereotypes of Pakistan as a nation perpetually in crisis, dependent on aid and vulnerable to external forces. For others, it was an opportunity to question whether the world was doing enough to support a country that contributes so little to global emissions, yet suffers some of the worst consequences of climate change. The influence of such statements is not limited to the public. Governments, aid agencies, and international organizations also take cues from the political climate created by major leaders. If the tone is dismissive, funding pledges and commitments can weaken. If the tone is empathetic and urgent, resources are mobilized more quickly and public pressure builds on governments to act. In this way, Trump's comments indirectly affected not just how ordinary people perceive the floods, but also how policymakers weighed their priorities. Another dimension of global perception shaped by his words is the broader narrative of solidarity versus division. In a moment of humanitarian crisis, the world expects leaders to emphasize unity, compassion, and shared responsibility. When the opposite tone is set, it highlights the fractures in international cooperation and the reality that humanitarian issues